Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy may be expected to come from Darwin's theory. Bring forward what is true, write it so that it is clear, defend it to your last breath. Thermodynamics, correctly interpreted, does not just allow Darwinian evolution, it favors it. Available energy is the main object at stake in the struggle for existence and the evolution of the world. Which is more remarkable fact about America, that millionaires are idealists or idealists become millionaires. Philosophy gets on my nerves. If we analyze the ultimate ground of everything, then everything finally falls into nothingness. But I have decided to resume my lectures again and look the hydra of doubt straight into the eye, and it be quite ominous if one values one's life. Since a given system can never of its own accord go over into another equally probable state, but into a more probable one, it is likewise impossible to construct a system of bodies that after traversing various states returns periodically to its original state. That is a perpetual motion machine. To go straight to the deepest depth, I went for Hegel. What unclear, thoughtless flow of words I was to find there. My unlucky star led me from Hegel to Schopenhauer. Even in Kant there were many things that I could grasp so little that, given his general acuity of mind, I almost suspected that he was pulling the reader's leg or was even an impostor. The most ordinary things are to philosophy a source of insoluble puzzles. With infinite ingenuity it constructs a concept of space or time, and then finds it absolutely impossible that there be objects in this space, or that processes occur during this time. The source of this kind of logic lies in excessive confidence in the so-called laws of thought. The general struggle for existence of animate beings is not a struggle for raw materials. These for organisms are air, water, and soil, all abundantly available, nor for energy which exists in plenty in the sun and any hot body in the form of heat, but rather a struggle for entropy, which becomes available through the transition of energy from the hot sun to the cold earth. It must be splendid to command millions of people in great national ventures, to lead 100,000 to victory in battle. But it seems to me greater still to discover fundamental truths in a very modest room with very modest means. Truths that will still be foundations of human knowledge, when the memory of these battles is painstakingly preserved only in the archives of the historian. Who is not familiar with Maxwell's memoirs on his dynamical theory of gases? From one side enter the equations of state, from the other side the equations of motion in a central field. Ever higher soars the chaos of formulae. Suddenly we hear, as from kettle drums, the 4 beats put in equals 5. The evil spirit vanishes, and that which had seemed insuperable has been overcome as if by a stroke of magic. One result after another follows in quick succession till at last we arrive at the conditions for thermal equilibrium together with expressions for the transport coefficients. Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy, I therefore take the liberty of proposing for this hypothetical new atom, which is not light but plays an essential part in every process of radiation, the name photon. It was not easy for a person brought up in the ways of classical thermodynamics to come around to the idea that gain of entropy eventually is nothing more nor less than loss of information. There is always the danger in scientific work that some word or phrase will be used by different authors to express so many ideas and surmises that, unless redefined, it loses all real significance. We frequently define an acid or a base as a substance whose aqueous solution gives, respectively, a higher concentration of hydrogen ion or of hydroxide ion than that furnished by pure water. This is a very one-sided definition. Since hydrogen is a constituent of most of our electrolytic solvents, The definition of an acid or base as a substance which gives up or takes up hydrogen ion would be more general than the one we used before, but it would not be universal. We may say that a basic substance is one which has a lone pair of electrons which may be used to complete the stable group of another atom, and that an acid is one which can employ a lone pair from another molecule in completing the stable group of one of its own atoms. A detective with his murder mystery, a chemist seeking the structure of a new compound, use little of the formal and logical modes of reasoning. Through a series of intuitions, surmises, fancies, they stumble upon the right explanation, and have a knack of seizing it when it once comes within reach. I take it that a monograph of this sort belongs to the ephemera literature of science. The studied care which is warranted in the treatment of the more slowly moving branches of science would be out of place here. Rather, with the pen of a journalist, we must attempt to record a momentary phase of current thought, which may at any instant change with kaleidoscopic abruptness. The scientist is a practical man, and his are practical, i.e., practically attainable aims. He does not seek the ultimate but the proximate. He does not speak of the last analysis but rather of the next approximation. His are not those beautiful structures so delicately designed that a single flaw may cause the collapse of the whole. The scientist builds slowly and with a gross but solid kind of masonry. If dissatisfied with any of his work, even if it be near the very foundations, he can replace that part without damage to the remainder. Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy may be expected to come from Darwin's theory. Bring forward what is true, write it so that it is clear, defend it to your last breath. Thermodynamics, correctly interpreted, does not just allow Darwinian evolution, it favors it. Available energy is the main object at stake in the struggle for existence and the evolution of the world. Which is more remarkable fact about America, that millionaires are idealists or idealists become millionaires. Philosophy gets on my nerves. If we analyze the ultimate ground of everything, then everything finally falls into nothingness. But I have decided to resume my lectures again and look the hydra of doubt. Science is the search for truth. Life is a relationship between molecules. Optimum nutrition is the medicine of tomorrow. The best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. Everyone should know that the war on cancer is largely a fraud. There is no safe amount of radiation. Even small amounts do harm. Life is a relationship among molecules and not a property of any molecule. Just one living cell in the human body is more complex than New York City. Satisfaction of one's curiosity is one of the greatest sources of happiness in life. You can trace every sickness, every disease, and every ailment to a mineral deficiency. Do unto others 20% better than you would expect them to do unto you, to correct for subjective error. Every ailment, every sickness, and every disease can be traced back to an organic trace mineral deficiency. Provided one has the correct level of vitamin, mineral, and nutritional input, the body can overcome disease. Man's great power of thinking, remembering, and communicating are responsible for the evolution of civilization. Science is the search for truth. It is not a game in which one tries to beat his opponent, to do harm to others. If you want to have good ideas, you must have many ideas. Most of them will be wrong, and what you have to learn is which ones to throw away. Humanism is a philosophy of joyous service for the greater good of all humanity, of application of new ideas of scientific progress for the benefit of all. Science is the search for truth, that is the effort to understand the world. It involves the rejection of bias, of dogma, of revelation, but not the rejection of morality. Everyone should know that most cancer research is largely a fraud, and that the major cancer research organizations are derelict in their duties to the people who support them. I have something that I call my golden rule. It goes something like this: do unto others 25% better than you expect them to do unto you. The 25% is for error. Do not let either the medical authorities or the politicians mislead you. Find out what the facts are, and make your own decisions about how to live a happy life and how to work for a better world. Does the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," mean nothing to us? Are we to interpret it as meaning, "Thou shalt not kill except on the grand scale," or "Thou shalt not kill except when the national leaders say to do so"? By the proper intakes of vitamins and other nutrients, and by following a few other healthful practices from youth or middle age on, you can, I believe, extend your life and years of well-being by 25 or even 35 years. We must have research for peace. It would embrace the outstanding problems of morality. The time has come for man's intellect, his scientific method, to win over the immoral brutality and irrationality of war and militarism. Now, we are forced to eliminate from the world forever this vestige of prehistoric barbarism, this curse to the human race. When an old and distinguished person speaks to you, listen to him carefully and with respect, but do not believe him. Never put your trust into anything but your own intellect. Your elder, no matter whether he has gray hair or has lost his hair, no matter whether he is a Nobel laureate, may be wrong. The world progresses, year by year, century by century, as the members of the younger generation find out what was wrong among the things that their elders said. So you must always be skeptical, always think for yourself. Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy, all children are born atheists. They have no idea of God. The source of man's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature. The unhappiness of people is due to their ignorance of nature. All religions are ancient monuments to superstition, ignorance, and ferocity. Tolerance and freedom of thought are the veritable antidotes to religious fanaticism. If the ignorance of nature gave birth to gods, the knowledge of nature is calculated to destroy them. It is only by dispelling the clouds and phantoms of religion that we shall discover truth, reason, and morality. It is thus superstition infatuates man from his infancy, fills him with vanity, and enslaves him with fanaticism. The atheist destroys the chimeras which afflict the human race, and so leads men back to nature, to experience, and to reason. All religious notions are uniformly founded on authority. All the religions of the world forbid examination, and are not disposed that men should reason upon them. Nature, you say, is totally inexplicable without a God. That is to say, to explain what you understand very little, you have need of a cause which you understand not at all. Savage and furious nations, perpetually at war, adore under diverse names some god conformable to their ideas, that is to say, cruel, carnivorous, selfish, bloodthirsty. The universe, that vast assemblage of everything that exists, presents only matter and motion. The whole offers to our contemplation nothing but an immense, an uninterrupted succession of causes and effects. When we examine the opinions of men, we find that nothing is more uncommon than common sense. Or, in other words, they lack judgment to discover plain truths, or to reject absurdities and palpable contradictions. If the ministers of the Church have often permitted nations to revolt for heaven's cause, they never allowed them to revolt against real evils or known violences. It is from heaven that the chains have come to fetter the minds of mortals. If we go back to the beginnings of things, we shall always find that ignorance and fear created the gods, that imagination, rapture, and deception embellished them, that weakness worships them, that custom spares them, and that tyranny favors them in order to profit from the blindness of men. Men always fool themselves when they give up experience for systems born of the imagination. Man is the work of nature, he exists in nature, he is subject to its laws, he cannot break free, he cannot leave even in thought. It is in vain that his spirit wants to soar beyond the bounds of the visible world, he is always forced to return. Suns are extinguished or become corrupted, planets perish and scatter across the wastes of the sky. Other suns are kindled, new planets form to make their revolutions or describe new orbits, and man, an infinitely minute part of a globe which itself is only an imperceptible point in the immense whole, believes that the universe is made for himself. What indeed is an atheist? He is one who destroys delusions which are harmful to humanity in order to lead men back to nature, to reality, to reason. He is a thinker who, having reflected on the nature of matter, its energy, properties, and ways of acting, has no need of idealized powers or imaginary intelligences to explain the phenomena of the universe and the operations of nature. It is thus religion infatuates man from his infancy, fills him with vanity and fanaticism. If he has a heated imagination, it drives him on to fury. If he has activity, it makes him a madman, who is frequently as cruel to himself, as he is dangerous and incommodious to others. If, on the contrary, he be phlegmatic or of a slothful habit, he becomes melancholy and is useless to society. Religion has ever filled the mind of man with darkness, and kept him in ignorance of his real duties and true interests. It is by dispelling the clouds and phantoms of religion that we shall discover truth, morality, and reason. Religion diverts us from the causes of evils, and from these remedies which nature advocates, far from curing. It only aggravates, perpetuates, and multiplies them. People have suffered and become insane for centuries by the thought of eternal punishment after death. Wouldn't it be better to depend on blind matter than a God who puts out traps for people, invites them to sin, and allows them to sin and commit crimes he could prevent, only to finally get the barbarian pleasure to punish them in an excessive way, of no use for himself, without them changing their ways, and without their example preventing others from committing crimes? The inward persuasion that we are free to do or not to do a thing is but a mere illusion. If we trace the true principle of our actions, we shall find that they are always necessary consequences of our volitions and desires, which are never in our power. You think yourself free because you do what you will, but are you free to will or not to will, to desire or not to desire? Are not your volitions and desires necessarily excited by objects or qualities totally independent of you? The Jehovah of the Jews is a suspicious tyrant, who breathes nothing but blood, murder, and carnage, and who demands that they should nourish him with the vapors of animals. The Jupiter of the pagans is a lascivious monster. The Moloch of the Phoenicians is a cannibal. The pure mind of the Christians resolved, in order to appease his fury, to crucify his own son. The savage god of the Mexicans cannot be satisfied without thousands of mortals which are immolated to his sanguinary appetite. How could the human mind progress, while tormented with frightful phantoms and guided by men, interested in perpetuating its ignorance and fears? Man has been forced to vegetate in his primitive stupidity. He has been taught stories about invisible powers upon whom his happiness was supposed to depend. Occupied solely by his fears, and by unintelligible reveries, he has always been at the mercy of priests, who have reserved to themselves the right of thinking for him, and of directing his actions. Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy may be expected to come from Darwin's theory. Bring forward what is true, write it so that it is clear, defend it to your last breath. Thermodynamics, correctly interpreted, does not just allow Darwinian evolution, it favors it. Available energy is the main object at stake in the struggle for existence and the evolution of the world. Which is more remarkable fact about America, that millionaires are idealists or idealists become millionaires. Philosophy gets on my nerves. If we analyze the ultimate ground of everything, then everything finally falls into nothingness. But I have decided to resume my lectures again and look the hydra of doubt straight into the eye, and it be quite ominous if one values one's life. Since a given system can never of its own accord go over into another equally probable state, but into a more probable one, the more we know, the more we feel our ignorance, the more we feel how much remains unknown. You are now in a state in which a fly would be, whose microscopic eye was changed to one similar to that of man, and you are wholly unable to associate what you see with your former knowledge. Life is made up, not of great sacrifices or duties, but of little things in which smiles and kindnesses and small obligations, given habitually, are what win and preserve the heart and secure comfort. Nothing is so fatal to the progress of the human mind as to suppose our views of science are ultimate, that there are no mysteries in nature, that our triumphs are complete, and that there are no new worlds to conquer. Nothing is so dangerous to the progress of the human mind than to assume that our views of science are ultimate, that there are no mysteries in nature, that our triumphs are complete, and that there are no new worlds to conquer. But if the two countries or governments are at war, the men of science are not. That would, indeed, be a civil war of the worst description. We should rather, through the instrumentality of the men of science, soften the asperities of national hostility. Cuvier had even in his address and manner the character of a superior man, much general power and eloquence in conversation, and great variety of information on scientific as well as popular subjects. I should say of him that he is the most distinguished man of talents I have ever known on the continent. Cavendish was a great man with extraordinary singularities. His voice was squeaking, his manner nervous, he was afraid of strangers, and seemed when embarrassed to articulate with difficulty. He wore the costume of our grandfathers, was enormously rich but made no use of his wealth. Cavendish lived latterly the life of a solitary, came to the club dinner and to the Royal Society, but received nobody at his home. He was acute, sagacious, and profound, and I think the most accomplished British philosopher of his time. Natural science is founded on minute critical views of the general order of events taking place upon our globe, corrected, enlarged, or exalted by experiments, in which the agents concerned are placed under new circumstances, and their diversified properties separately examined. The body of natural science, then, consists of facts, is analogy, the relation of resemblance of facts by which its different parts are connected, arranged, and employed, either for popular use or for new speculative improvements. John Dalton was a very singular man. He has none of the manners or ways of the world. A tolerable mathematician, he gained his livelihood, I believe, by teaching the mathematics to young people. He pursued science always with mathematical views. He seemed little attentive to the labors of men, except when they countenanced or confirmed his own ideas. He was a very disinterested man, seemed to have no ambition beyond that of being thought a good philosopher. He was a very coarse experimenter, and almost always found the results he required. Memory and observation were subordinate qualities in his mind. He followed with ardor analogies and inductions, and however his claims to originality may admit of question, I have no doubt that he was one of the most original philosophers of his time and one of the most ingenious. The moment after, I began to respire 20 quarts of unmingled nitrous oxide. A thrilling, extending from the chest to the extremities, was almost immediately produced. I felt a sense of tangible extension highly pleasurable in every limb. My visible impressions were dazzling and apparently magnified. I heard distinctly every sound in the room and was perfectly aware of my situation. By degrees, as the pleasurable sensations increased, I lost all connection with external things. Trains of vivid visible images rapidly passed through my mind, and were connected with words in such a manner as to produce perceptions perfectly novel. I existed in a world of newly connected and newly modified ideas. I theorized. I imagined that I made discoveries. When I was awakened from this semi-delirious trance by Dr. Kinglake, who took the bag from my mouth, indignation and pride were the first feelings produced by the sight of the persons about me. My emotions were enthusiastic and sublime, and for a minute I walked round the room, perfectly regardless of what was said to me. As I recovered my former state of mind, I felt an inclination to communicate the discoveries I had made during the experiment. I endeavored to recall the ideas. They were feeble and indistinct. One collection of terms, however, presented itself, and with the most intense belief and prophetic manner, I exclaimed to Dr. Kinglake, "Nothing exists but thoughts. The universe is composed of impressions, ideas, pleasures, and pains. Nothing is more practical than a good theory. The life contest is primarily a competition for available energy. In my view, all salvation for philosophy may be expected to come from Darwin's theory. Bring forward what is true, write it so that it is clear, defend it to your last breath." Thermodynamics, correctly interpreted, does not just allow Darwinian evolution, it favors it. Available energy is the main object at stake in the struggle for existence and the evolution of the world. Which is more remarkable fact about America, that millionaires are idealists or idealists become millionaires. Philosophy gets on my nerves. If we analyze the ultimate ground of everything, then everything finally falls into nothingness. But I have decided to resume my lectures again and look the hydra of doubt straight into the eye, and it be quite from a knowledge of his work we shall know him. Sound consists of an undulating motion of the air. He whose faith never doubted may justly doubt of his faith. Nature always looks out for the preservation of the universe. God is the author of the universe and the free establisher of the laws of motion. God would not have made the universe as it is unless he intended us to understand it. Even when we find not what we seek, we find something as well worth seeking as what we missed. Darkness that here surrounds our purblind understanding will vanish at the dawning of eternal day. He that said it was not good for man to be alone placed the celibate amongst the inferior states of perfection. There is no less invention in aptly applying a thought found in a book than in being the first author of the thought. In the Bible, the ignorant may learn all requisite knowledge, and the most knowing may learn to discern their ignorance. He that condescended so far and stooped so low to invite and bring us to heaven will not refuse us a gracious reception there. Well, I see I am not designed to the finding out the philosopher's stone. I have been so unlucky in my first attempts in chemistry. Female beauties are as fickle in their faces as in their minds. Though casualties should spare them, age brings in a necessity of decay. The gospel comprises indeed, and unfolds, the whole mystery of man's redemption, as far forth as it is necessary to be known for our salvation. As the sun is best seen at his rising and setting, so men's native dispositions are clearest seen when they are children, and when they are dying. I am not ambitious to appear a man of letters. I could be content the world should think I had scarce looked upon any other book than that of nature. Exalt your passion by directing and settling it upon an object the due contemplation of whose loveliness may cure perfectly all hurts received from mortal beauty. The generality of men are so accustomed to judge of things by their senses that, because the air is indivisible, they ascribe but little to it, and think it but one remove from nothing. Our Savior would love at no less rate than death, and from the supereminent height of glory stooped and debased himself to the sufferance of the extremest of indignities, and sunk himself to the bottom of abjectness, to exalt our condition to the contrary extreme. The book of nature is a fine and large piece of tapestry rolled up, which we are not able to see all at once, but must be content to wait for the discovery of its beauty and symmetry, little by little, as it gradually comes to be more and more unfolded or displayed. As the moon, though darkened with spots, gives us a much greater light than the stars that shone all luminous. So do the scriptures afford more light than the brightest human authors. In them the ignorant may learn all requisite knowledge, and the most knowing may learn to discern their ignorance. I use the scriptures, not as an arsenal to be resorted